Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and today on our show we have Shoshana Bass. Shoshana is a creative producer and puppeteer. She's part of the family business of Sandglass Theater in Putney, which is internationally renowned and whose productions magically bring together puppets, music, visual imagery, and audiences one after the other. So here we are with Shoshana. Welcome, Shoshana.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yes, it's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here.
We're going to talk about puppets today, okay? We're going to talk a lot about puppets. Talking to you the other day, I realized that you really grew up on the road with your parents for a good part of your childhood. You were traveling with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, what was that like?
Well, it was perfectly normal to me, but I didn't know that it was otherwise for other folks. And I think it was something that was very particular of that time and was possible at that time in the late 80s, early 90s when my parents, so they founded the company in Germany in 82 and then came to the States in 86. So all the networks that they were still performing in and working in were mostly in Europe, although also we were in Brazil, we were in Japan when I was 3, we were in Israel, so it was all over the place, and hardly ever in the US actually.
Wow.
Because it was not really a known art form here at that time. People are familiar with the Muppets eventually because it came over through live television. And the Jim Henson Festival was the only puppet festival for many years that existed in the entire US, and that doesn't exist anymore.
Wow.
So thusly, we were often in Europe.
Yeah.
And I think, my mom, they worked very hard to create a sense of home with something that was so stimulating and all over the place and always with different sounds and different languages and different foods. And so one tour, my mom packed my whole down feather bed to take with us and carried it through the whole tour. I had a pillow that was very important to always have. We even stopped a plane once to get it back. And things like that. Once we had Halloween while we were on tour, and we took all our clothing and put it on in different ways with stockings on the head and wearing each other's clothes and tying them on to make some kind of makeshift costume. Yeah. And then my parents would hide in the bathroom and I'd knock on the door, trick or treat, and they'd open the door.
That's great. So you had trick or treat at home?
In the hotel.
Did you get to a certain age and start performing as well with them?
Well, I often took part in shows that my dad directed as some, the Caucasian chalk circle. I was the little boy that gets put in the circle. I was chained to a post for the whole second act.
Wow.
And in Midsummer, the little Indian boy, right? So little things like that. And then I actually didn't pursue a career in puppetry. I'd never said no to it. I never was kind of wanted to do something else, but I was exploring. I did a lot of theater. I did a lot of dance and a lot of circus and was very physical always. But somehow what I think I was always looking for in all those other forms was exactly what my parents do and was in the world of puppetry. And I was really searching for that in an artistic way with other media, but I'm really happy I returned.
Yeah. Going all over Europe, and how did you do school when you were on the road? Did your parents do a little bit of homeschooling?
Well, I read a lot. I was just gone a lot. School was not a very consistent thing for me. I have strange gaps in my knowledge. But I had an artistic education and a worldly education through the nature of what we were doing, and a geographical education and a political education that is very unique to how I grew up, and I'm very grateful for. And I think, there were certain places that acknowledged that. I went to Hilltop here in Brattleboro for upper elementary and middle school. And they would just have me keep like a journal and collect the money and tell the stories and do some math problems and come back and talk about it.
So it didn't feel really like a completely different world to come back here and be in school?
I think it did. Yeah, I think that, I didn't have that social circle that I grew up with because I wasn't consistently here in my childhood. And that circle for me is my family because it's the only thing that was consistent my whole life.
And very consistent, much more consistent than for most of us.
Yeah.
And traveling, I think, also brings you together, when you're going into completely different areas and venues that you've never been to before. So it was extremely unique way to grow up. And then, so you went through school here in Brattleboro, and then you went to Naropa for college.
I did I did 1 year out in Oakland, California, and then I was back here, and it was a kind of a dark, broody time for me of, I think we all go through existential
dark broody times. Yes.
But what came out of it for me was Naropa and the choice to go there, and I think it really, honestly, I think it really saved my life.
Because?
In terms of working with mental health, in terms of a way of, people always talk about that schools are, they prepare you for your job and then you get whatever high-paying job at. And of course, Naropa is not like that. It doesn't have its roots in any of that. It was founded by a Buddhist monk who first came to Vermont, actually, when he first came to the U.S. And then went out to Colorado, and it was first an institute, and all the hippies of the 60s came and listened to him, and then so now it has a kind of, it walks that bridge with these things from its roots, and then of course being an accredited university.
Yes, right. It's changed a lot, right, over the years.
It has changed a lot, but there were things in just day-to-day practice and in personal investigation and things that, and in just self-inquiry and contemplation that were just so vital for me to have a mentorship around and a container for.
Yeah, right, and a structure. It gave you a certain kind of structure, I would think, in sort of a free kind of way.
Yeah, plus I built my own major, so I could really, I just loved every moment of what I was researching. I was so fully in it.
And what was it?
I put together performing arts and peace studies and Tai Chi, because it's Naropa and I could do that.
That's right.
Which is so much, actually, it made a lot of sense because Tai Chi or Qigong forms, it's all part of puppetry. It all is wrapped in with that. So
the way you do it, yes.
The way we do it, correct.
Absolutely, yeah. And so you studied all of those things, and yes, they must have given you great preparation for the kind of puppetry that you do.
Yeah, and it was interesting because at that point, Sandglass was less involved in social activist work. And when I was in college, my father and I kind of, as Sandglass became members of the National Performance Network, which has very much refocused all their priorities in anti-oppression. And on a national level of where the money gets allocated to performers all over the U.S. And it's a network of presenters, which was a newer identity for Sandglass. So we also present work and produce work. So through Sandglass's connection with that and what I was studying at school, my dad and I were both kind of coming into these investigations and sharing books and sending names back and forth about these social activist theater traditions. I mean, of course, I think theater is rooted in that, and it's always had a tinge of that in whatever form, but kind of to come up in that language and in really clarifying the mission of the work we were doing at Sandglass and in our own shows, but also in who we bring into this community and whose voices are represented in that, how we practice listening, why that form is important in the world right now and vital in the world right now.
Yeah. So Sandglass has really shifted a lot over the years in terms of its, as you say, its focus and its presentation. And I think that thinking about starting Sandglass in Germany, where there are so many roots there for puppetry and different kinds of theater that we just don't have in America. And it seems so embedded in so many of the different cultures in those countries. So to bring, it's just very interesting to see how Sandglass has evolved, not only, you know, as the theater itself, but also in terms of performance and in terms of message.
Yeah, I mean, puppetry is perfect for that, right? And that's the roots of Punch and Judy or Pulcinella or Karagosh, like any of these traditional puppetry forms are of the marketplace. They are there to speak truth to power, really. The ones that can get away with saying anything because it's just a puppet. Like, it is completely disattached from some human that can be targeted. And it runs that nice line. Someone talks about, or my dad often references this essay of someone who's talking about this this line between the sacred and the profane, and if you bend it around like this, that space in between the two, that's where puppetry exists.
That's great.
And because you can really get to things without getting distracted by the ego of meeting another human personality.
Right,
you know?
right. And also there is a little bit of space. You know, you're not, the identity is not pinned to a person who's presenting this. It's someone who you know, you can't go head to head with. You know, it's very interesting as an art form.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes there is this like weird objectification, right? And we play a lot with this in Babylon, in the newest Sandglass work that's just received this National Theater Project grant. And it's all, the refugees are all played by puppets. And it is essentially that, because none of us as actors are refugees ourselves, right? And so, and it's hard, and it's direct, and it's a little bit, you know, you have to play with it very mindfully, but in the way that we can then kind of work with how these people become objects of whatever, talking behind their back, objects of not a life at all, just being thrown around for political interests or whatever it is. The puppet becomes a very strong metaphor for how it's used. And at the same time, the comment that always comes from the audience is that there's extreme reverence and care for these objects. And the most amazing part of that, I think, what I like the most about it is that in this form of puppetry, right, there's the puppeteer, there's the puppet, and there's the audience, and all three are absolutely essential to animate the puppet, to give it life. We talk about animation rather than manipulation, because we want to talk more about the soul than controlling. It's not about control at all for us in our method. And so the puppet provides this invitation for the audience to fill it with anything, to put all their stories and perspectives, because it's an empty vessel. And it can actually hold everything in one room at once. That is all separate truths in one equal space. It's really quite unique in that way. And so an audience member, if they take that invitation, they're quite literally investing in the life of that puppet. So then if you have these puppet beings that are actually these others, or these things that we've put into these us and them categories, and one is actually investing in the life, that line becomes different. I mean, someone is emotionally invested, with their breath invested in this other demographic or other experience.
Yeah, it's a very different kind of relationship, really.
Yeah.
You know, and I think one of the things that's always struck me about Sandglass is the fact that we are seeing the puppeteer's body, usually, in some, like even if it's just a little fragment, you know, of an ear or an arm or something, we're very aware that there's a puppeteer there, which is, I think it's part of the experience that you get with Sandglass. You know, you as you say, you know, it takes it's the puppet, the puppeteer, and the audience coming together in some kind of a sort of a tacit triad. You know, that we're in this together, we're sharing this experience, and we're also invested in a way that we didn't even expect. You know, but because you are bringing this to us, you know, we as the audience are able to experience this performance in a whole different way.
Yeah, and I think that we don't cover ourselves as puppeteers. Some puppeteers do. They wear all black, or they wear a hood, or they're even completely out of the light. And we've had shows that's part of the aesthetic of the whole show, and has a reason for being that way. And for us, it's always important that there is a reason. Whatever choice you make, you have to have a reason behind it. It can be any choice, but it has to be intentional.
Right.
So this is in my solo show, that is, and we'll talk a little bit about that, I think, but is the material from my father's signature piece. This is one part of the voice recording that happens. I speak about how one day at rehearsal with my father, he taught me how to disappear, and he stepped behind a puppet. And he did, he just disappears. And he's not covering or anything like that, but it's in the surrender, it's in the witnessing, it's in the presence, it's in the breath, and just this giving of an anima. And it's quite something. It's actually also amazing to be on the other side and feel it happen as a puppeteer. I was telling you about that experience where I was doing Zadel, who is the puppet that I've struggled most with feeling okay performing, but is also, don't tell them this, I love this puppet more than anything. It's like my favorite puppet of the show. It's like very, very sacred to me. And I think because it carries all my ancestry and that kind of history and lineage, and my father, and this puppet is negotiating with the angel of death and trying to get out of it, and walks that same line with the humor, but something that's very real. It's actually a story that my father wrote the entire text. He says on his most displaced night in New York City, he'd come home and the person he'd sublet the apartment to had sold all his furniture. And there was nothing there when he walked and came back into this apartment. And so he just had like a pillow and a blanket on the floor, and woke up in the middle of the night and just wrote out the entire, and it hasn't really changed since then. This is Zadel's story. Yeah. I had this experience of playing him that suddenly he just kind of played his scene, and it was split. I was watching and witnessing and curious, and it was bizarre. But I've heard this talked about many times with puppeteers, and it's not always this way, but it's pretty wild when it is. And he's like giggling and playful and messing with his shoes, and I'm standing behind watching like, oh my God, but the shoes are metaphors for and making all these connections in my own brain that is separate.
So he kind of took over a little bit, right?
Completely.
Yeah. And came up with things. You already had the script. You already had the whole thing that was going to happen. But he improvised. He didn't go off script, but he was inserting all his own little giggles and different things that. That's real animation, right?
It was really interesting.
Yeah. And probably, people talk about, especially New Age kind of things, about channeling. Did it feel like that? Did it feel like he was coming through you, or did it really feel like he was on his own and separate?
That's a really good question. I mean, sometimes I refer to it as like the nirvana of puppetry, when this thing just and channeling, it does sound a little New Agey, so it's a hard word to use, but there is a spaciousness to it that just allows the breath to come to source almost from your feet out through your hands in a way that doesn't have any blocks, that is all the neuroses of the mind that's usually judging you while you're doing something and having all sorts of opinions about things, and all that stuff and all I was doing was watching and listening. Yeah.
Did it feel like, when you say breath, did it feel like breath, or did it feel like energy, or was it like a combination of those things?
I think they're the same thing.
Yeah. And he had his own distinct persona.
Yeah, which he always does, but there was something very autonomous about it, I guess.
There was I read a great line, I think it was probably from the website, but it was, to animate an object and to let it live is to imbue it with love. So Wonderful quote.
Puppetry is an act of love. That's from my show. That's on the website, huh? Interesting. Oh, it's in that review.
It must be the review, yeah.
So that's from the show called When I Put on Your Glove, which is, so Eric, my father's signature piece, Autumn Portraits, has toured for 38 years or something like that. And he just retired that piece last year at Thanksgiving. He played it for the very last time. And he was in the process, that last couple years we were sharing the puppets because 3 years ago I had a bad fall, an accident that kind of ended my circus jobs and dance job and all the physical things I was doing, just kind of from one day to the next were switched. And there was a bit of an identity crisis in all of that and figuring out what I was doing. But it really created the space for me to finally just work with Sandglass and just study with my parents, which is what I moved back to Vermont to do. And I had been working so hard that I hadn't been able to do that properly. So in this recovery process, this piece evolved, and my father decided to teach me 4 of his vignettes from this show. And I took those 4 vignettes and I worked with a director named Jerry Stropnicki, who I'd met through the network of ensemble theaters. He had been reading letters, like love letters that his parents had written back and forth to each other. So he was very much engrossed in this family investigative work. So he came and lived with my family for a month, and we did story circles, which is a certain technique.
Yes, I remember this, yeah.
And we did them around the kitchen table, you know, like it was very not the way they're usually done in a community, but very intimate. And then I developed my own show that these pieces are present in terms of representations or metaphors or moments of dealing with spiritual crisis in our life and themes that ripple through that whole thing. But it's very, there's a lot of memories in it. There's a lot of the healing process of losing a certain capacity and finding other capacities and these questions of why we risk things, why we push to our limits and what we're expecting and mortality. Like it's got a lot of themes in it.
The big questions.
A lot of big questions.
Yeah. So Shoshana, you have performed this show, your new show, the solo show, When I Put on Your Glove, and you performed it in San Francisco already. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
It performed for the first time, like out apart from Sandglass, at the Co Festival in Amherst. Then I did it at the National Puppeteers of America Festival in St. Paul, and this summer it was in San Francisco. And next month it's going to Taiwan.
Wow.
And I'm performing it in Mandarin.
You're learning the language.
Well, there's just a little section I have to do live. A lot of it is recorded, so it's possible to take it on the road. It's going to Montreal in March, so that'll be in French. And hopefully to Cuba in 2020, which then will be in Spanish. Yeah.
Oh, that's exciting.
So it has a lifetime to perform, and it's very exciting to be on the road with those puppets in particular. It's really special to me. It's really special to me to be doing this while my father is as present as he is with it and can guide me through, coaching me through the pieces and tours with me and, does my sound for me.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Yeah, he's my puppet wrangler. I mean, it's really so beautiful. Yeah. And I feel so lucky to have come to where I have come right now, even though, there's always ups and downs to everything. Yeah. But this is truly meaningful to me to share so much time with my parents. And my sister and I perform our mother's work. So I get to go on the road with my big sister, which is so fun for me. Great. Every little sister's dream, I think. And we perform our mother's hand puppets, like a Casper Theater, which is a traditional German hand puppet.
Yep.
And I do a flea circus, and we sing little songs.
Oh,
and
that's great. So that's a whole separate
that's
show
a whole
that you're
other
doing
program,
as well.
and that's for kids and
Yeah.
families. And we were in LA and San Diego with that on a big tour
wow.
in April,
cool.
and so that's been really fun.
Yeah.
And all of it is kind of bound up in the passing of Sandglass, which is happening right now, which is
Passing hand to hand, you mean? Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
So we're in a strategic plan. We're looking at the whole succession plan and what the legacy is.
Uh-huh.
Artistically, we've already been working in terms of us performing our mother's work and creating our own work as well. And with Glove is a big part of that passing.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, of course, in the structure, in the business structure, it's also being passed. So my father and I are working side by side now as artistic directors for the next 2 years before he steps back from that.
Yep.
And I've already stepped in to assume directorship of the Puppet Festival that we just had in September, which was a lot of work, and but also kind of reassuring for me of like, yes, this is the work I love to do. This is so meaningful to me. These are the partnerships I love to support. These are the things I want to investigate. I want to bring everyone together for just these community celebrations, and it worked. So I feel a little more confident to go on with that.
I would think, and Shoshana, it's such a great thing to have the inheritance that you have and the family you have, and to have this legacy, but also to know that as your parents did, they brought it forward. They were always bringing it forward. So you are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
And your sister too, which is
absolutely.
Cool thing.
It's such a living culture,
Yeah.
And they were continually adapting.
Yeah.
I mean, it just transformed so much over their lifetime in order to just survive.
Right.
And what needed to be done differently and what else needed to be done so that they could continue to make a living.
Yes.
And that we could be involved in our community, and that we could be, pushing for positive change, and
That's right.
whatever it is
That's right.
that these things continue to cycle. And yeah, thank you for saying it'll continue to.
Yeah, it is continuing. It is happening. And so we are going to be able to see your show when I put on your glove, and that's going to be the same weekend, I believe, as the Putney Craft Tour.
That's right.
Yes.
So we have partnered with the Putney Craft Tour pretty much every year.
Yep.
Usually it's Autumn Portraits that plays, and now it's going to be When I Put on Your Glove.
Oh, wow.
And so people can go to all the craft stores all day long and see the open studios, and then at 7:30 on Friday and on Saturday will be this show at Sandglass in our own theater, which is in a renovated 60-seat barn. It's
Yes.
very intimate and
Very.
Special to go there.
It is indeed. Thank you so much, Shoshana.
Yeah, my great pleasure.
It's great talking to you, and it's wonderful to hear more about Sandglass and the fact that it is continuing to evolve and change. And so many thanks to your parents, whom I don't think we even mentioned, Inez Zeller Bass and Eric Bass, who started all of this, and their daughters who are now taking it forward. Thank you.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for
much,
being on
Wendy.
the show.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks to all of you for tuning in again today. We really appreciate it. We love to have you. We love to have these shows. Stay tuned for Shoshana's show. You can go to their website and actually see a little clip from the show, which is pretty intense and very moving. We'll have that information at the end, right after I stop talking, which is going to be right about now. So thanks again for tuning in.